okay, and that's measurable. Some fruits don't. Sweet cherries are the kind that don't produce a spike in carbon dioxide. I can see I'm already losing some of you. Don't worry, we're not going to get much deeper than that. Okay. What I was looking at with sweet cherries was the fact that there's many different varieties of sweet cherries that are grown in the area of Washington where I was from. But what we were looking at is how can we harness an observation that has been made about sweet cherries? How can we harness the fact that some varieties of sweet cherries, the stem pops off easier than others? Okay, so most cherries that you see, classic picture is cherries with the stem on. But they don't necessarily have to have the stem on to be edible. You don't need the stem. You use the stem to pick them up and pop them in your mouth, generally. So the farmers wanted to know, what if we could produce some cherries and harvest them so that we could harvest them more quickly if we just shook the tree and got the cherries to fall down without ruining the fruit. Okay? Instead of having people go out and pick every single cherry off the tree, what if we just shook the tree, they fell down, we collected them, and we could sell them that way without the stems? And so what they tasked us with doing, what the farmers tasked us with doing, was figuring out why or how we could cause that break to occur. Okay? And so we could get the break between the stem and the fruit to occur, and then they could grow a bunch of cherries, shake them, and get a lot more of them sold before they went bad. Okay? So the hypothesis is that there's a variety called Bing. Bing cherry is very popular. And that variety, the observation had been made that you could give it a certain type of gas, and that would cause the stem to fall off the cherry more easily. Okay, that's what I call inducible here. And so if you give it the ethylene gas, then it forms an abscission zone, just like when a leaf falls off a tree, the cells kind of break down and the leaf falls. The same thing happens at this abscission zone here, where you've got the abscission zone right between the stem and the fruit itself. And so the idea was, if we give them this gas, then they'll be able to break off and be able to fall and not be bruised and battered. Okay? We had two other varieties as well, that one we observed did not respond to ethylene, or the gas that causes the cherries to fall off. And the other one, it responds very loose anyway, and it'll fall off anyway. Okay? And so they have to be extra careful if they don't want the stems to fall off when they're harvesting that variety. So that's the Skeena variety, is the one that falls off automatically. The Chelan variety over here, that's the one that doesn't even fall off even if you do gas it. And the one in the middle, the Bing one, the one called Bing, that one, if you give it gas, it falls off. If you don't give it gas, it doesn't fall off. Got it? All right, so what my job was to do is to collect the samples right at this location, right at that juncture, that abscission zone. And because I'm more into molecular biology, what I did is I collected those samples and I basically measured the genes that were being expressed in that location, that specific location. Okay, so what this graph shows you, let me just quickly break it down here. You have before Ethifon, or before that gas treatment. Then you have right after the gas treatment of the three varieties. Okay, and then you have 2 weeks after the gas treatment, a measurement taken. Okay, so it's like a snapshot. Right before we give it the gas, right after we give it the gas, and then 2 weeks later to see what happens down the road. Okay, and so you can see here, one of these really kind of stands out, right? That one, obviously, right in the middle. We've got a big column there. Okay. Now, what this is a ratio of the treatment and control. I'm not showing you all of those details, but what I want you to see is that compared to all the rest of them, that variety, 6 hours after the ethylene or the gas that was given to it, it really is way different than any of the others. Okay? So what that tells us is that there's something going on very quickly after we apply the gas in the genes themselves. Like certain genes are switched on, other genes may be switched off. There's something different going on in this variety than in the other two varieties. And that may explain why the observation was made that this variety Bing responds to the gas, okay? And it causes the abscission zone to form and the fruit to fall off more easily. So what this is just one example from a larger presentation, but what this is what's known as a transcription factor. I know most of you may not realize what that means, but basically when you have a gene that's part of your DNA that's producing a protein, you have other genes that are saying, hey, that gene needs to turn on. And so a transcription factor is that next level of gene that tells other genes to turn on or off. Okay? Does that make sense? If you know what a gene is. All right, so what this means is that we have a lot of genes in the variety that is inducible, the Bing variety, that are able to turn on or turn off in response to the gas. And so we're looking at those specific biologically relevant genes, okay, that are inducible. Okay, so what does this tell us about science, really? What does this quick example, tell us about why we do science and why we do use the scientific method? Well, what we're doing in looking at, in that detail, at these molecules, these genes that are being turned on and off, as we're setting up these experiments, what are we doing? We're learning about the creation that God has made. We're learning about how God has made the world. And as a Christian, if I'm looking at this creation that God has made, if I'm looking at what the fruit looks like, what the effects of the comparisons that we develop, what they do, if I can understand more deeply about God's creation, then I can help other people to enjoy God's creation better. I can glorify God in that myself, but I can also teach others about what God has made in the world that you probably have never heard about any of that before. And you probably won't ever again. But at least at this point, you have a quick glimpse at the depth of what God has put into the world that as scientists we're trying to unravel, to uncover, to discover about the world. Francis Bacon had no idea about anything about DNA, about genes, probably about sweet cherries. Maybe he did at that time. He had no concept of that, but what he did do was he looked at the world with observation, and he questioned what had previously come before when it comes to the philosophy from Aristotle, from those guys. He questioned that, and he said, God has made this world. God is a rational being. God has ordered this world in such a way that I want to understand the true nature of this world. I want to understand what this world is all about, how it's put together. I want to set what he really did was set the table for the rest of people coming after him to have a tool, that scientific method, that tool that we use, Christians, non-Christians alike. We use this tool to unravel the mysteries that God has put into creation. So why do we pursue science? Well, it's the same answer to why do we pursue Christian education, really. Because truth matters, number one. It's important that we understand true things about the world, whether that be through special revelation in Scripture, but also in general revelation. God has placed us in this world that we as his image bearers ought to be demystifying, in a sense, ought to be understanding who God is through his world and through his word. And it's true that just like the fact that truth matters is that we can, as individuals, as a group here at ACU, we ought to be pursuing the life of the mind because we can glorify God through the life of the mind. Okay, so that's why we pursue Christian education, and really that really underscores why we do science, why we pursue science and scientific research. Scripture says, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, God, for what he sees outside, the observations that he makes about the world around him. Again, he says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day, night reveals knowledge. People ought to be in awe of what God has created and ought to be seeking to unravel, to learn how God has created those things and how he put this world together. I don't know if any of you have caught it, but just yesterday there was major news announced in the physics world. And I haven't had a chance to understand all of it, and I probably never will, honestly, because it's pretty complicated. But just to give you a glimpse of what just happened, even just yesterday, the analogy that I've heard from just my brief understanding is that just like back when we were first developing the first telescope, what we did was we looked at the stars through a telescope. Then we started making observations about the stars and using math and astronomy, all that, to try and understand what God had created in the universe outside of this earth. Just like we've been working for the last 400 years, changing the telescope a little bit, using scientific method to figure out new ways to observe the universe. Just yesterday they announced that they figured out a completely new way to observe the universe. And it's too complicated for me to even try to explain now, but it's, instead of using light radiation, they use protons and electrons, and they're able to use new data coming in to understand what God has created. And it's exciting to be even at the very beginning of something like that. So look that up and read more about what the physics world has just announced about how we are interacting with the universe in a completely new way now. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Phiri now, and he's going to just give you an examples from his life about how research worked for him, and I'll let him explain where he's going with that. Thank you.
So good afternoon. So I'll bring things down. Ben took us high up there, protons and atoms, genes probably may still be way out. But anyway, let's say that I was just thinking when Ben was talking about that gentleman in 1500 doing science. One of the things that used to strike me was I spent a year in Germany, in Heidelberg, and at Heidelberg University you find a building that was built in 1314, in the 1300s, you know. Ancestors at that time, where were they? Chasing things? Were they, because at that time they already had universities and they were already exploring science. And I'm thinking, so my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, what was he doing in 1730 something, But that's how sometimes we are far removed from the world of research. And another thing about Africans is sometimes we have this issue where we respect nature so much that we don't want to disturb it. So if there's a stream here, we can't divert it to make sure that it waters things. No, you leave it the way it is. Don't touch it, don't disturb it. You won't even, the most you can do is build a bridge on it, but you want to disturb nature because you're not sure. Even a tree can be your grandmother who died a few years ago, So you're worried if you cut down this tree, you may. But this is why Christian education is important. Why? Because God says, rule and subdue, tend, keep the earth. And part of that means that you must understand, you must be educated, you must know how things work for you to be able to manipulate them. Imagine if you like eating oranges. When you eat an orange with seeds, you know how laborious it is, right? You chew one, you remove the seeds, But then some people thought, how about if we could genetically modify them so that the oranges don't have seeds and make them easier to eat? Don't we? And probably you eat them. But then when the discussion comes about, should we have GMO things, genetically modified organisms, everyone stands in protest, no GMO, but you eat the oranges. They've been modified, the seeds are not there anymore. And this is what Ben was talking about, There's an issue here. The farmer harvests these fruits. So what do? How do you do it? Quickly, simply. That's where science comes in. So my personal experience is that I, first of all, born and raised in Zambia. And I went to the University of Zambia. So most of you, you're probably starting out your university life. At that time, for me, the biggest graduate and how do I finish well? Because if you're in our context, if you graduate like we were at Unza with a silent, because there were 4 levels, you graduate either with a silent, with a credit, with a merit, or a distinction, right? So the guys who, when they call your name, Masauso Phiri, then it's quiet, and that's the silent, The normal one should be John Phiri, credit, hey, and then this one, merit or distinction, then you've passed well. But if you're going to go anywhere in our context, merit or distinction, for you to have chances to pursue your education further, at least you need to have gotten somewhere there. So for me, my concern was, how can I get either a distinction or a merit so that it can actually further my studies? I can get a scholarship where I can do a master's or a PhD. And so I was at Ridgeway campus, the School of Medicine there. I did something called biomedical sciences, and then I just worked hard. I really worked hard. I said, I need to get a merit or distinction for me to go forward. And I did. I got a merit at the time because distinction was a bit out of league because I'd wasted a bit of time playing in the first few years. So when I got serious in my 3rd year, I made sure I got at least a merit. And what that did was that it opened a door when the university wanted to employ people. I was one of those who were employed as a junior faculty member. So we used to call it the Staff Development Fellowship. And so I got employed by the University of Zambia. I was quite young. And then they sponsored me to do a master's degree. And I did a master's degree in 2011 when I started. And then, because again I said, I'm a Christian, let me apply myself to my work. And as I was applying myself to my work, I met a professor from South Africa who said, come and do your PhD. So at that time, I didn't think so much about going to do PhDs. But they literally compelled me and they chased me out of here. They said, go to South Africa, stay there, do your PhD. So I went to South Africa in 2014. I did an honors degree there. Then I did another master's degree. Then I did a PhD. So I'm quite a learned person, am I not? 5 degrees to my name. But it wasn't necessarily intended to be like that. It was an aspect of diligence. Work hard, do your very best now. Don't worry about tomorrow. Today, work extremely hard, get the best grades you can, and then go further. So in terms of research, I really spent most of my life doing that because research is a way of asking questions. You're observing and you're asking questions, and how can we do something about this? And most of the work that I have done, and especially in the context of Africa and the world, what research has done is that it's a global community. So you find that you meet with people everywhere. 2 weeks ago, I was with a guy from Argentina. We're in South Africa learning about the HIV cures. The other time, you find yourself in the US, So it's a global community. That's the beauty about it. And one of the things that I've seen, that there's a difference in how we do work here in Zambia, in South Africa, the rest of the world. And I'll tell you why. But what it is that when I did my master's here in Zambia, it was very difficult because it's hard to have money to do your work. The instruments are not as many as Ben had in his lab. For here, you have to pool resources together. So it takes extra effort for you to actually get stuff done. But when I went to South Africa, in my university, it was well equipped. I could dream up an equation in science, If I break down glucose in hydrogen peroxide, and I can take hydrogen peroxide, and I can measure it and make it change color for this, I write that down, and I quickly go into the lab. I try it out. I get some glucose, I get some enzymes, I put them there, gives me what I'm looking for. It's done, it's working, and I'm happy. But here you can't do that because lack of infrastructure. And also my PhD was based on what we call nanotechnology. So nanotechnology these are very tiny molecules, like your hair, now 1,000 times less smaller. You actually use a big microscope to see it. That's how, in a sense, that's how a virus is, COVID and other viruses are very tiny. And that's why they're able to enter and spread very easily, because they're very tiny. And so that's what I did my PhD in, thinking about how to use that to diagnose certain diseases and how you can use that forward. But when I came back to Zambia, again, and this is where the problem is, you come back here and you feel lost because you don't have the equipment that you had where you're coming from, and you also don't have the resources, the people to help you do the work. And so you start doing several kinds of work just to find yourself. So it's been an interesting few years being back here and trying to get into the research. But the benefits of doing research in Zambia is that, one, there's a lot to study. There are lots of questions. If you talk about diseases, I teach medical students and I teach them pathology. Pathology is the study of diseases. If you talk about diseases, there are a lot in Africa. We have a lot of diseases. Name it, malaria, what else? HIV is there. Talk about even what we call neglected diseases like bilharzia. It's also here. You know, trachoma, blind because there's a worm in their eye. So we have the diseases. We also have the population. A lot in Africa. Okay, Nigeria obviously beats us because 1 in every 3 Africans is a Nigerian. But we still have the population, we have a lot of people. So there are a lot of questions to be answered, questions to be explored, a lot of things that need to be brought into context. For example, if you're sick and you go to the hospital, they'll measure your blood, and then they'll tell you, oh, this is high, so we need to treat you. It's high. Where did they get a lot of Zambians to test all your blood sugar to know that most Zambians' blood sugar is above 6? No, the US and the UK, and then they've also brought them down to us. So we need to ask the question, what does high mean for an African, for a Zambian? You bring it in context. And that's what we need to do in research. So there's a lot that needs to be done. The disadvantages, obviously, it's limited resource. Research is expensive. Research is expensive. You need big equipment, and most of those things are not cheap. I was dreaming about starting my own lab, so I was very confident, and I asked the company, say, how much would you sell this instrument for? You know, and so they took their time to give me a quotation, and they sent it to me. It was over $50,000 at the time, over $1 million. I said, I can't afford that. You know, research is expensive, so you really need a lot of funding to do that. And our governments don't fund it as much. To some extent, you can understand why. People are hungry, so do you buy food or do you buy a lab equipment? I'll leave that for you to answer. But one thing is important, is that you have people like Thomas Edison, who started the General Electric company. And it was research. He was asking questions. Instead of using paraffin, kerosene as we know it, to light up your house, how can we have an electric bulb? Something that is there. And when people started the motor, the automobile industry, trying to build cars, they were saying, how can we replace a horse from the road? So we need to be asking questions. Sometimes I'm driving in Lusaka and I'm seeing those guys carrying wheelbarrows. You see them, man? Carrying big things that the guy is actually moving like this, And I'm asking, what can we come up with that these guys can use to ferry their product? Move stuff from intercity to wherever. Can't we think about something? That's research, that's innovation, and that's what else. You come up with local solutions that work in our environment. And that's why we need scholarly minds, because God has said, here's the earth, make it better. Make it better. And recently, like I've been saying, and I should be concluding soon, I was attending an HIV cure research. So what has happened is that about 15 people or so have been cured of HIV completely. So they had HIV, and then one underwent a bone marrow transplant, and that just cleared out the virus. So if you know anything about HIV, is that when one person is infected, the HIV stays in and then it hides in your cells. It hides the way that you can't see it. So that when someone stops taking the drugs, at some point it just resurfaces again. But then this one person had leukemia, cancer, underwent bone marrow transplant, and it just wiped out the HIV. And now the scientific world is asking, what's happening here? And then another case happens like that there are people who are resistant to HIV. And so they got the bone marrow of those people who are resistant to HIV and they put it in that person and it just wiped out the virus. So now the scientific community is asking, if someone can get cured of HIV, can we find a way of making this accessible to everyone? What exactly is happening here? And so we're there now thinking and cracking our heads. Okay, if someone takes, so there have been several experiments, clinical trials happening, and some of the questions that are being asked is, if someone would stay on antiretroviral treatment, which is drugs for HIV, for about 65 years continuously, we predict that it may actually wipe out the virus completely, that someone can be cured. But then how can you fast track that? How can you quicken that process where someone can actually just be injected something and they're cured? So that's what science does. So it's meant to help you fix a sinful world, but it also helps you do better, improve standard of living. That's why research is important. And I see young minds here, and you need to start thinking about that. See things that upset you or are inconveniencing, and start asking questions. How can we do this better? Or why is this happening? Why is this happening? And research is not just in science, it's in economics. They've been asking questions, why is it that people are remaining poor despite trying out a few things? We give them aid, give them money, they blow it up. Okay, you say, let's try another program, agriculture, let's give them fertilizer. You give them fertilizer, the guy uses fertilizer. When they stop giving him fertilizer, he stops using fertilizer and he goes back and no longer farms. So they wonder, but what is it that is causing these people not to improve and get better? Why do they want to remain in poverty? That's an economic research, it's a social science research. And then in science, we have our own questions. And so, here I am trying to encourage you that as you are thinking about your academic life, as you think in the context of Christian education, start asking questions. How can we improve things? What can I do to improve the livelihood of our people? Why is it that we can't manufacture stuff here? How can we remove the wheelbarrows off our roads? By inventing something better. Can we have a solar-powered wheelbarrow that the guy can stand on and it's moving and is ferrying all those big things? That's the question we must be asking. We must not be lazy as young Christian scholars and just be happy with textbooks. Your core, my core, is that we are here to subdue, to make this world better, to make Zambia better through what we have done to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kilian. Dr. Phiri, please do not pack. I'm sure we have some questions from the audience. I've received a few online as well. If you have a question, please raise your hand. A mic will come your way. I think I'll ask Dr. Phiri to come back up since the questions I have are for you right now. If you have a question, please just raise your hand and the mic will come your way.
There's a question.
Question here in the middle section.
Thank you for the well-articulated presentation, but I wanted to ask, at the first presentation I had, but you are inducing feeding into the fruits. So I wanted to ask, does it alter the sweetness of a fruit, or it leaves it just the way it is?
So the question was about the gas itself. Does that alter the sweetness? Okay, well, the process of ripening itself there's a lot of chemistry and biochemistry going on within the fruits. So I would say the answer to your question is no. It does change the time at how long it takes to get to the point where it's ripe and sweet, rather than the amount for that variety.
Thank you. Any other question?
I also heard about the GMO. So I wanted to ask, there's some health effects on the human body. Is that true, or is that speculative?
So when you're talking about GMOs, it's a wide open kind of thing. Like what Moss was talking about at first was genetic modification by like crossing plants, okay? That's technically GMO, genetic modification. What people normally associate with GMO as like a scary thing is when you're using new methodologies to alter the genetics of a plant. Now, most GMOs that are currently on the market around the world are not about nutrition, they're not about increasing the nutritive quality of a plant. What they're generally about is reducing the problems that farmers have with plants. So they're generally so that farmers don't lose money because a bug gets into their maize crop and destroys the crop, okay? So the GMOs protect from the bugs, the nutrition of the plant itself. They are developing more and more potential for the consumer, the end consumer, those who buy the product. For instance, there's something in Canada called it's basically an apple that has a genetic modification so that you know how when you slice an apple and you just let it sit around, it gets brown? That's an enzyme that breaks down and oxidizes and turns brown on the surface. There's nothing wrong with that apple. You can eat it, it's totally fine. But what they've done is they've modified that enzyme in the apple. So now when you slice it, it just stays white and it looks better. And so you're able to slice up a bunch of apples, put it in a package and sell it in the refrigerator in the supermarket, or take it on the school bus to school or whatever. So now you can have sliced apples and eat more fruit that way. Okay, so that would be an example of using genetic modification for the end consumer. Again, that has nothing to do with nutrition. That really isn't on the market right now. I could go on and on about this, but you'll have to become an agriculture student.
Yeah, I think that answers it, right?
Question over here.
Thank you very much for the presentation, both of you. This question can be answered by either one of you, maybe even both. Listening to the presentations, it seems there's a high level of problem solving that has to be, in fact, it takes a different kind of mind to think that there are problems to be solved. Under normal circumstances, no one would be thinking cherries are a problem that have to be solved. In the Zambian context, we've been eating nshima for the better part of 2 or 3 centuries, and hardly anyone thinks of nshima as a problem to be solved. But if cherries are a problem to be solved, I would assume even nshima as well and other things. So what can we be doing as individuals to train our minds such that they're thinking of the world as problems to be solved to the glory of God?
Yeah, thanks, Masauso. That's an important question. You see, like they say that judge a person by the questions they ask, because they're thinking. When someone is thinking, they're asking questions. Like, for example, why don't we have a Shima cooker? Right? We've got a rice cooker, right? Just put in the rice, press, 30 minutes, rice is gone. Africans eat shima from South Africa all the way up north of South Africa. Why don't you have a shima cook? Just put the water, the milk, press it, come back 20 minutes later, just get. I think they're there, some bigger commercial level. But that bothers me, you know? That bothers me. And I think people have thought about it, they have tried. But that's a big market. By the way, such innovation and research thinking is rewarded even in the marketplace. If you came up with that and you patent one, you're going to sell across countries. Just change according to how the Zimbabweans like it, and according how to the Ghanaians take it. Just, you know. So, now that's just one example. So we need to also be asking questions. Some of these questions come about by things that trouble us, but they also come about by taking time to read, and not just to read and regurgitate information, but to read and think about what you're reading. And to be asking questions and saying, is this really it? Is this really true? You're really questioning that. And asking the question, can this be done better? So there are a lot of ways in which we can be thinking about things. Can this be done better? Or can we do this thing better? So anyway, let me just answer it in that broad sense. Ben, you can please come through.
Yeah, I think one of the other answers to this question, this bigger picture question, is what we're here for this conference about, the Christian liberal arts understanding of the world and an approach to education in general. That's what liberal arts is all about, is building the kinds of minds that are inquisitive about how the world works and about how all these things fit together, from literature to science to maths and English. Like all of these things, we need to see that world holistically, so then we can ask specific questions and be able to dive deep into those areas. So we want to have read broadly so that we can then go deep. And part of the training in the reading broadly is that liberal arts education.
So one other question that you can ask is, for example, in your class, and you see some people doing better than you. They pass. Most of the time, they're doing better. One good research question is, what is it that they're doing that makes them pass? And I don't. It's a good research question. You go out and you find the answer. You observe their characteristics. I think that's how I passed my math in my grade 9. There was this guy who always used to get over 90%, and I was struggling. And I just said to him, can I observe you, see how you study? And I think that's how I got better. So you can start now. There are lots of questions to be asked. Personal, big questions, small questions. Have an inquisitive mind. And I think this is the aspect of Christian education, that you take the cultural mandate seriously. Go, tend, rule, subdue. You can't do that without knowledge, without thinking, without asking questions.
Question over there, and then another one over there.
Good afternoon. I think my question is to both of you. You've encouraged us to study science. Now my question is concerning AI. As Christians, I think, give us some guidelines on how we ought to think about AI. Because I think, if I remember very well, when GMO started, I was one of those who said, it's like changing what God has naturally made. Now, how do we draw the line with those that are going into AI and even wanting to change so many things, even just the way humans reproduce, they want to do other things. So why do we say here we cannot go beyond this as Christians? Thank you.
Okay. So AI is one of those things, well, you touched on a couple other things like reproductive technology and stuff like that. I'm not going to go in that direction with this comment, but when you're talking about AI, the way that I understand it currently and there's a lot to talk about with it, but as a Christian, I like to think of it as a tool another way that we're harnessing what God has given us. We're harnessing creative human minds. Okay, so it's a tool that human beings can use to be more efficient in their work, to be more precise in their work, rather than as a tool to, obviously, if you're using AI to cheat and write essays for you, that's not a good use of a tool like that, because you're not only cheating in the course, but you're cheating your own mind from developing as a student in those things. But as a tool, I think as teachers, as lecturers, we need to understand what those tools are capable of, because the students will definitely know what they're capable of. So we need to understand how the students could use them, and then adjust our approach to education based on what they can do and how they can be an aid to not only education, but to how people operate in the real world. Because we ought to be thinking not just about how people are doing things 10 years ago and teaching to that, but we ought to be thinking about, okay, how are people doing things now in the real world and in 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Because we obviously can't predict that exactly, but a tool like the large language modules that are being used now, the AI, like ChatGPT and things like that, those tools, they're not going away in the world. So, and they're only going to get more efficient and stronger and more useful, I think, in many ways. So we need to be, as Christians, we ought not to just draw the line and say, no, we should never use them because they're in and of themselves, but rather they're a tool that can be used to glorify God, to quickly synthesize research, to quickly synthesize arguments and ideas, to quickly take care of tasks that maybe took hours before, and now we can do them in several minutes. Same thing like a washing machine or something like that, right? It takes hours to hand scrub the wash, but with a washing machine you can do other things while that's working, right? This is another technological tool that is developing over time, and I think we need to be positioned as Christians to think ethically, yes, about how these tools operate and how they work, but also how they can be used to bring glory to God. Another example that I think right away is the internet itself, right? The internet itself is a tool that humans have used for communication, for everything really in the world now. It's also been used by Christians to spread gospel content throughout the world, right? So it's one way that the internet has been used to advance Christ's kingdom and advance the spread of the good news of the gospel. It's also been used for terrible things. So it's not the tool itself, it's how we're using it, how we're thinking about it, how we're taking advantage of what God has given us for His own glory. Any other thoughts?
Yes, so I think when we think about AI, first of all, like the ChatGPT, for those of us who are not in it, it's actually a very good thing. Write your essay in broken English, copy and paste it there, and it just brings out in very good English. It sort of helps you to do some copy editing. So just like any other tool, I'm sure if the Apostle Paul resurrected today and you read for him his letter to Romans from your cell phone, you probably, what happened? Because the time he was there, the only scrolls, big ones, and one scroll for this book, one scroll for the other, but as the Bible in one place, and then from the Bible to now a digital copy. So it's just how we see these tools, and like Ben said, they're just going to get better and better. So I think our responsibility as Christians, one, is to study these things and know how we can use them. Two, to remember that you're a Christian. So issues of truth, justice, righteousness, you can't cheat using AI. Put in an essay there, it will come out very verbatim that I know you can't write it. You will not be able to write that. So it will write a lot, very long sentences and words. So you don't use it to cheat. Use it to write here as a tool to to help you get your stuff done better in the right way. So it's going to be with us. It's going to get better. I have the app on my phone, so it's very good. You ask it a question like, how do I solve this Pythagorean theory, which I forgot from grade 10? It just gave me the formula, you know. So it's like improved Google to some extent, yeah.
You've sort of answered the question. I wanted to bring the AI question, but I'll still ask my question. I want to see how you can marry, because research is about asking questions and trying to improve what you have. And I think you made reference to subduing the earth. So I'd like I'd like for you to marry subduing the earth and 1 Timothy 6:6-10, because I think especially 10, it says, for the love of money is the root of all evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith, pierced themselves with many pangs. So we're trying to better, we're thirsting for how to find new ways and find new technology. You know, we may be safe content with the way we cook our nshima, you know, so how do you marry subduing the earth and content?
Sure. So when you think about that verse, that phrase, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil in there. One of the things that you also have to remember is, what is money? Money is a tool that is used as a medium of exchange. So what we're really talking about when we're talking about money and wealth, the pursuit of money for it as its own ends, I guess you could say, as one thing. And really what we're talking about there is idolatry. So when we're pursuing things in this world above what we are to pursue, which is the glory of God, which is Christ, when we pursue, put those things up on a pedestal, and that's what our goal is, that's what our end is, that's what our telos or ultimate purpose is in life, to pursue money, that's where money becomes then the idol, rather than the tool that can be used to glorify God. And when you talk about the idea of becoming content versus being content versus pursuing excellence in research or in pursuing further and further, yeah, I understand what you're saying there when it comes to the idea of being content with what God has given us to do. At the same time, though, there's a tension because God put Adam in the garden to till the earth and subdue it. And he gave Adam raw materials, and he said, make this, Masa, better. Be a creator, image God as a creator as well. So you're recreating, in a sense. You're taking the raw materials that God has given, and you're creating new things. You're imitating the creative nature of God by pushing technology, by changing and molding the world around you to fit your needs and to lead to human flourishing.
So I've always asked myself this question. You know the parable of the talents, right? So the king took 5 talents, another 2, another 1. I've always asked myself what the master would have said to the person who was given 5 talents and came back with 3 more and did not make 5 more. Would he have said, well done, I've given you 5 and you haven't done much, but you just brought 3. Do you see what I'm talking about, right? He was given 2 talents. He says, Lord, with what you've given me, I've brought back 2 extra, 2 more. But let's say he just came back and said, you know, give me 2, but I've just come back with 1 more. Because we're told that they were given according to their abilities. And what God required, or what the Lord was saying, is we must be industrious. We must do our very best to multiply the things that God has entrusted us with. It's stewardship. It's stewardship. And so it's not about greed or anything. I've been reading a book, It's based on Proverbs, but it's entitled Learning from the Richest Man in the World, and it's really learning from Solomon. And one of the things that the author is saying is that Solomon does not tell you to pursue wealth. He encourages us to pursue diligence. And then he says that the diligent shall rule, the diligent shall have wealth, and other things that follow. So you, like in the New Testament, we're told, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. So your task, our task, is to pursue diligence, excellence, asking, is this better? Is this what we're capable of? Am I doing enough for me? Or should I do, better? Should I create? And what comes as an offshoot? Wealth will be one of them. But there'll be a lot of other things that may come. So if one here comes up with a Shima cooker, which does the job really well, and your quest is not so much the money, but just something that relieves us. Our mothers come home, they just switch on, press the button, they go, come back, Shima is ready. You have solved a big problem, but a lot of people may actually buy it and diligence. So there's nothing here about the love of money. It's about serving people. It's about wanting to better people's lives, loving your neighbor as yourself by what you do. And I think that's where it comes up to. So I think that if you're a two-talent person, make sure you make two other talents. At least multiply what God has given you. That's what it's about. And the question is, I'm sure those who receive the talents are asking, how can I double this? How can I make sure that what my master has given me, I can double? And they start thinking, and then doing, and then eventually it goes back and the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. So I hope that answers it. So it's not a pursuit of wealth. Actually, Proverbs says, desist from pursuing wealth. Rather pursue diligence, hard work, righteousness. Seek first the kingdom of God. The rest will be added to you.
Incomplete answer.
I see. Yeah, I get you. So Paul says we came into this world with none. Really, he's saying that those who pursue wealth pierce themselves with many sorrows. So there are people who try to get rich quickly. You've heard them, right? Recently, a colleague of mine is a doctor, going to be a professor, old man. He wants to make money quickly, So he told me about the Kumono scheme where you put in 3-5, and after 2 years you get 71,000 kwacha. So I asked him, you invest 3,500, get 75,000. What's the multiplication there? And I couldn't answer. And obviously we know that scheme went down because it was a get-rich-quick scheme, right? So those are the things. Those who seek to get rich quickly pierce themselves with many sorrows. They lose money. Others end up stealing. Others end up getting in this. So what the Apostle Paul is encouraging there is contentment, in the sense that with food and clothing, we are content. But what we're saying when we're talking about research and innovation is asking about how can we improve the things that we're doing. It's about diligence, bring in an inquisitive mind. How can we make things better? As an offshoot of that, resources, money, wealth do come. But you're not pursuing money per se. You're pursuing excellence. You're pursuing what God has given you to do in the culture mandate.
Okay, we are 3 minutes over time. I know I saw some hands with questions, and I have these questions here. We will save them for tomorrow. If there's time, then Dr. Kilian at least will be here to answer your questions. Dr. Phiri may or may not be here, but they're a good team, and I'm sure that they will agree more than they disagree. So thank you both. We appreciate you. And ask if there are any announcements. I made an announcement earlier about Antioch Conference. I don't have all the details yet, but I do believe it's this weekend. Once I can speak about that very quickly.
We have the Antioch Youth Conference at Kabwata Baptist Church on Monday and Tuesday. Those are the public holidays. If the attendance from ACU is high, again, like it was for the Heroes of the Faith, Heroes of the Faith weekend, transport will be arranged. I believe there was a poll that was put up by Natasha in the WhatsApp group. I haven't received the numbers yet. 35 and below, there's no free bus. So I need to make sure that the numbers coming from ACU are at least 35 plus. We can organize 2 trips if need be, like we did last time. We can even organize 3 if the numbers are good enough. So it's happening on Monday and it's happening on Tuesday. One more thing on the same. The Antioch Conference has Pastor Million Kambuli, your lecturer, as the main speaker. In case you are tired of him, there's going to be a seminar on Tuesday called Fear Men, Fear Women. You haven't even heard the worst part yet. The person who is going to be doing that presentation, the seminar, is 2 people, Graham Chingambu and some random guy named Mwansambewe. So sign up so that you are there for the seminar, and Natasha Ondatsika will collect the names. Thank you very much.
Okay, so it looks like you want to go. Please sign up quickly so that KBC is ready for you. It should be a good time. Tomorrow our sessions begin at 14, I believe. I need to confirm that. But you have the schedule, so I know you know what time we're supposed to be here. Let's try and be here early. A concern, some of you are not here on time, and we're not sure why, but please strive to be on time tomorrow. Really, especially for you as ACU students, this is an incredible opportunity for you to start to get these things now and put them into practice, ideally of longer than the rest of us to live these things out. But you have to be here to hear it before you can apply it. So let's be on time tomorrow. Let's set up in good time, and then we can finish on time and go on and do the other things that we need to do. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for today. We thank you that you've been with us. We thank you for the things that we've learned in the 2 sessions that we've had. Thank you for Dr. Merkel. Thank you for Dr. Kilian. Thank you for Dr. Phiri. Thank you for the knowledge that you've given them, the wisdom that is evident in the way that they've gone on to apply what they've learned. Pray that you would help us glean from what they've taught us, to learn, to drink deeply, and also gain the wisdom that is available to us to apply the things that we're being taught. Help us prize biblical education, help us prize inquisitiveness and research, and help us do the best we can in the ways that you've gifted us so that we can make this world better, not just for ourselves, for our children, but for our children's children and the generations to come. Be with us in the rest of the day and go with us in Jesus' name. Amen. Last thing I forgot, as I announced earlier, there's a session at LBC this evening. If you need transport, then please let us know. Dr. Merkel will be speaking about cultural transformation through education. Look forward to that. We are dismissed.